John Best, born and raised in New York. Probably lived every place but Staten Island. Um, Now live in Jersey. And just taking some time to have some old stories with my old friend Alan Swerdlow.
Okay, so you and I went to the area club in the 1980s. Tell me a little bit about your memories of the area club, the environment, what it was like entering, that kind of thing.
Well, the thing about Area Club, it was something that hadn't been done in New York because I don't know, I guess it was the production company or the people who owned the club, they were in partnership with a movie set company. And so the idea of the club was to change the theme to popular movies, current movies, or just different themes every month. And it created quite a buzz in New York City. Everybody wanted to be there.
Who's everybody? Give me
Well,
a few
when I
people.
say everybody, they were famous people that wanted to go. At that time, those type of clubs were sort of underground. You had to get in by word of mouth. They weren't publicized on newspapers. I guess it would be considered what we say now as A-lister clubs.
So, not everybody was able to get in. Why don't you describe the scene at the front door and how you were able to get in?
Well, the doorman, his job was to make sure that the coolest people came in, because if the coolest people came in, then the people who they actually catered to felt comforted in that environment. So the outside was a scene where you had to, it wasn't so much you had to know somebody, it was how you behaved outside that determined whether you got in or not.
But now let's see. The area club was 157 Hudson Street. The building still exists there, but there's no more club there. So when you would actually enter the club, you would see a group of people, and would you stand in line, or how did they actually let you in versus everybody else?
Well, first of all, you probably had to look the part. So, I mean, it was a little bit easier for me because I was one of the trendy guys that lived in New York at the time. But even with that said, there was a certain behavior you had to have at the door. You couldn't go to the door waving your hand trying to get the doorman's attention. You couldn't call out his name even if you knew him. It was sort of like you had to act like you just got out of a taxi cab and you belonged there, so let me in.
Okay. So they would let you in. They'd lift up the velvet rope and describe the scene as you walked into the club.
Well, I mean, it was great if you were single, because if you were allowed in the club, you always had about 5 or 6 women begging to get them in, and which ensured that you had some company for the night. But for the most part, it was pandemonium because a lot of people didn't know the behavior, and in their desire to get in the club, it created quite a stir. People were yelling. They were even offering money to the doorman. Lots of things, but all of those things were ways for you not to get into the
So
club.
when you got into the club, what did it look like?
When I walked into the club, it depends on the theme that they had for that particular time. I've walked in and seen various types of movie sets from movies in the past. It was always a surprise once a month, so I really can't think of anything in particular, but it was always different.
But there was a time you told me about this series of installations. One was by Warhol. Why don't
Well,
you
this one in
talk
particular
about
I
that?
remember because it celebrated the artists of New York, the up and coming or the established pop artists in New York, which were people like Kenny Scharf, Keith Haring, Andy Warhol, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and that I remember distinctly.
And it was, my memories of it was very dark inside. It was very dark with sort of mysterious installations and objects, sometimes people in cages and so on and so forth.
Yes, they did have certain. They had. There was a series of little cubicles, I guess you could say, in the wall, and people used to, depending on the theme, you see dioramas. You see people, if, for certain events, you see people inside the actual cubicles in costume and such. Yes.
But it wasn't a museum. It was sort of a haunting, slightly edgy, maybe dangerous feeling place, from my memories. But you were certainly more attuned to some of the inner workings of what happened in the club. Like, for instance, you would hang out with Basquiat, and you would spend time with him, and sometimes in some areas of the club, like the bathroom. So maybe just discuss that a little
Well,
bit.
you know, the bathroom was not just the bathroom. The bathroom was sort of the meeting place for various reasons. People would go there. You know, back then, drug use was a lot freer then. So a lot of people did use the bathrooms for distributing drugs, using drugs. There was also a place, because the bathrooms were unisex, it was a place that you could get away from the music, sit on a couch with a drink, and talk to your friends.
And there was some sex going on in there as well.
You know, occasionally, some one thing would lead to another, I guess, and every once in a while you hear a couple of doors banging, yeah.
Now, one time you hung out with Basquiat a lot, from what I understand.
Well, I won't say I was a friend in the sense where I was with him every day. I was more of a friend that, we went to the same clubs. Occasionally I would go to parties at his house. He would invite me to his openings. He was kind of quiet, and I kind of felt that, that he liked to be around people that he didn't have to talk to.
So there was one scene where you walked in, and there was that exhibition we were talking about with Warhol, and there was a moment where I guess Basquiat had fallen out with Warhol, and then he...
I don't, at this point now, at that particular juncture, as I said, I didn't really get into his business, so I didn't know that there was a rift, but I found out afterwards there were.
So what happened?
During this exhibition where they had the different artists in the cubicles, my friend and I had gotten out of the taxi cab, and Jean-Michel was in the taxi cab right behind us. As we got out the taxi cab at the same time, he called us out. He called out our name, and we waited for him so that all three of us can go into the club together. We walk into the club, and we're walking down the hall, and because it was a theme of all the artists in New York at the time, the three of us, took our time looking at the different installations that the artists had put in. And I remember seeing Keith Haring's and Kenny Sharp's, and then the next one after that we'd come up to was Jean-Michel's. Jean-Michel's, of course, was well done, but not wanting to blow smoke up his butt, we just kind of gave him his accolades and just moved on. Next to his was Andy Warhol's installation. And when we walked up to his installation, to be honest with you, I was kind of taken aback because I didn't know what I was looking at. In this installation, it was, I guess the booth was about this big down, and it was encased in glass. And in the middle of this space, Andy Warhol had taken a solid white column, and he had it probably up to about here. And then he had a light shining on top of the column. So he had the column that came to about here, and he had a light that shined right on the top of this column. And I found myself spending more time looking at this column than the others, for the mere fact that he hadn't actually done anything. He had just taken a light and had it shining on this column, and you were left standing there trying to figure out what he had done, which was probably the genius of the installation, because he didn't want to do anything in the first place, but he wound up getting more of your attention than any of the other artists because he hadn't done anything. which was probably the genius of him. At that particular time, John Michel was standing in the middle looking at this installation. My friend was here and I was standing here. At that moment, John Michel kind of grimaced. And at this point, we didn't know what to say because we didn't know what we were looking at still. And at that very moment, he must have grabbed all the phlegm that was in his body for I don't know how long, but he proceeded to spit right at the point where the light started. So now, instead of you looking at this column, you were watching this huge ball of phlegm going down the length of the installation. And after he did that, he kind of smiled, being content with himself, and he walked away. And as we walked away, we seen other people coming up to Andy Warhol's installation and kind of looking at it. And at this point, they thought that the phlegm ball was part of the installation. So,
It's amazing.
I thought that was incredibly funny.
So, just briefly tell us about the last time you saw Jean Michel and what happened.
The last night I saw John Michel was a few hours before he passed away. That particular night, we were in Area Club, and John Michel had just come back from Hawaii, where he had been, I think, for a week or 10 days. Him and I, a few months before, in Area Club, had an incident where he came up to me and he asked me if I had a joint for him to smoke. I did have a joint, but when I handed it to him, he said it was too small. And he said to me, okay, I'll take this, but one day I'm gonna just come back, and people, people were welcoming him back from New York. They were asking if he was okay. I think at the time a few people had acknowledged the fact that he did have a heroin problem, and he had gone to Hawaii to so-called kick the habit. But he used marijuana as the stepping stone, the means of him kicking the habit. So we're in the bathroom in Area, and he calls me over. He says, yo, he says, here's a real joint. So me and I and my friend, we sat down, we smoked with him for a little bit, and then, I went off and started partying in the club. I probably went to the bathroom about 3 or 4 times through the course of the night, and each time I went to the bathroom, John Michel was still sitting in the bathroom. And it seemed a little bit weird, but it didn't really register because it was John Michel, and it's kind of like if he was doing something weird, it wasn't weird, it was John Michel. But I remember leaving the club at about 3:40 in the morning, when I went in, actually my friend was the bathroom attendant, so I went to say goodbye to my friend. John Michel was still sitting in the bathroom. I shook his hand, gave him a hug, said good to see you again, and left. And then that Friday afternoon, somewhere in the early afternoon, we had gotten news that he had passed away.
So, just in summary, this was quite a period, the 1980s in New York. It was very, very different than the 2013s in New York.
Yes.
It was a moment where you can pretty much live out your dreams in some ways, which are much more constrained right now. Just give us a little summary about how you felt about that era, living in that era, hanging out with these people, hanging out with people like Jean Michel, Warhol, Mick Jagger, you said earlier.
Yes.
You know.
New York at that time was for all of the bad things that came with being in New York City, it was very fresh and very, very refreshing. I would think that's the best word to say. To know that you could be in places with people that were famous and they were just normal, regular people. There was no hypes. There was no bottle service. There was no, security around these people. And you actually felt that you were part of a scene, even if you never spent any time with these people. You felt more in touch with things as opposed to now. It was very fresh, and New York was very exciting at that time.
Well, actually, one thing I didn't ask you about the Odeon. You spent time at the Odeon?
I went to the Odeon.
So that's a scene that we're
I went to
also-
Odeon, but I was the kind of guy that if I went to Odeon, I went there to eat.
Yeah.
And so after I ate, I usually got bored. Didn't really like sitting around watching people at tables.
Yeah.
So my experiences there was just to go to eat and leave.
But what was special about Odeon? There was a downtown restaurant. There weren't any other restaurants.
There weren't that many restaurants. I would think. Let me see. Back then, some of the restaurants that people used to frequent was in the meatpacking district, Florent.
Yeah.
There was Indochine
Yeah.
in Astor Place. There was Odeon in Tribeca, and of course there were other places sprinkled around, but those were the places that people sort of went most of the time.
All right, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.